Shalom, shalom, brothers and sisters. Shalom, my brothers and sisters. Giving honor and praise unto the Most High, the Creator and the Maker of heaven and earth. My name is Yeshaya Yisrael of the tribe of Dan of the nation of Israel. This particular presentation, brothers and sisters, will be about Black history in the Old Testament. What this presentation, brothers and sisters, entails is going and talking about the matter of the Israelites and the Egyptians. This presentation, brothers and sisters, will involve history, documentation, external sources. When I say, brothers and sisters, external sources, I am talking about external to the Bible. That is to say, sources outside of the Bible. All right. Now, I understand some people may not deal with the Bible. That's your understanding. You understand. I understand that some people may not agree who deal with the Bible to even have to go into other sources to speak upon a certain matter. Nonetheless, brothers and sisters, what we want to do in respect of taking advantage of what is referred to as Black History Month is to go over the history in this particular part, in part 2, about the Israelites and the Egyptians. Okay? So I understand I wasn't able to be heard clearer on the last time we started this a couple of minutes ago, so I had to redo it. And I thank the people who do let me know if the sound is okay, if the sound is audible, because I cannot hear myself, all right, when I'm doing these presentations in this particular matter, all right? So presentation regarding Black History Month, Black History in the Old Testament, Part 2, okay? Let us, brothers and sisters, start off in this particular manner. Next slide, if we will. Notes. Egypt is mentioned over 500 times in the Bible. From the era of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moses, Jeroboam, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Uriah, the Israelites were acquainted with the Egyptians. Egypt, called Mizraim in Hebrew, had its own particular name for itself, Samatawi. Mizraim, meaning double straits, and Samatawi, meaning unity of the two lands. Tashemu, upper, and Tamehu, lower. All right. So we just want to go over that for particular purposes, if we will. Okay. All right. Let's go on, if we will, in this particular matter. What we are looking at, brothers and sisters, here on the map here, this is what is referred to as Lower Egypt. This is what is referred to as Upper Egypt. But for those who know, they know good and well that this is the northern part that we see right here, where it actually says lower. All right. And the upper part here is, if we will, where is actually the southern part. All right. So this is something we want to point out for edification purposes. What we're looking at here, brothers and sisters, is Nubia. Nubia, brothers and sisters, all right? It comes from the Egyptian word nub, N-U-B, and that word means gold, all right? In the Bible, it speaks about the land of Cush having gold and good gold in Genesis chapter 2, all right? So we just want to point that out for edification purposes. If we will, brothers and sisters, you have here the Sinai. This is east of where Egypt is. All right. Now, over in this particular area here, ancient Israel will refer to that as the Negeb. The Negeb, brothers and sisters, all right, means south. So that's what we want to point out for edification and reasoning purposes, if we will. All right. Let us continue, brothers and sisters, in this particular presentation. I want to share this with some people who I would think or understand will care to watch it live. And if not, maybe later on, so be it. Now, brothers and sisters, this right here being Lower Egypt, they called it so because of the flow of the Nile, which went from the south into the north. All right. And Upper Egypt they called it that because, as stated, of the flow of the Nile. Now, the Nile in the Egyptian is referred to as the Iteru, and the Nile in Hebrew is referred to as Yaor. I'm going to type that inside of this here. All right. If we will, for edification purposes. All right. Let us continue on in this particular matter. Notes and book. In the book I wrote, Egypt Talking Writing, which you see posted right there, I spoke of the Exodus occurring in the era of Dynasty 13, during the rule of Neferhotep. Some, however, equate the Exodus with the timing of Dynasty 18 with Amos, or to Dynasty 19 with Ramses II. The mention of Ramses in the Bible in Genesis chapter 47, Exodus Exodus chapter 1 and Exodus chapter 12 and Numbers 33 is referred to as an anachronism. Now, what an anachronism is, brothers and sisters, is what the city would be known for during the time of that particular author of a matter. So let me give an example. I am currently in New York. New York used to be known as New Amsterdam. All right. So if I am writing about the aspect from when the Dutch had the same particular land, all right, they called it New Amsterdam. I'm not going to call it New York, which was called that by the time the British came over. All right, I'm going to call it, if I'm talking about the era of when the Dutch was there, I'm going to call it the name that it was familiar with that. So that right there is what we're talking about for reference purposes when we say the terminology anachronism. All right. So now in Genesis 47, when you see Ramses, in Exodus 1 and in Exodus 12 and Numbers 33, it is talking about it from what the city would be called or better known as according to that author. That's what we want to point out in that particular matter. Now, when the Israelites were there, it would not have been called that by name. That's a fact with that matter. Let us continue on with this particular matter. Thank you. The pharaonic timeline and biblical timeline according to the studies that I did. All right. Abraham in the Bible, first intermediate period. Joseph in the Bible, and Manahat the first of Dynasty 12. Moses in the Bible, Senusrit the third, and Manahat the third, Sobekotep the third, and Neferhotep. Now, for those familiar with the book that I wrote, I equate Neferhotep right here that we see here, brothers and sisters, with the matter of the Exodus. All right. And we're going to show this over here inside of italics. And with Sobekotep, he was the pharaoh that the woman Senaptisi wrote to in what is now referred to as the Brooklyn Papyrus. In the Brooklyn Papyrus, brothers and sisters, is when you get into the Hebrew tribal names that is written inside of that. And she was speaking about her captives, all right? Of the names that are mentioned, over 40% of the people have Hebraic names, such as Issachar, Menachem, Asher, and so forth and so on. So that's what we want to point out in that particular case. When we're looking right here at Amenemhat the third, We want to show this, if we will, say in the red, right? And Amenemhat III was the pharaoh who was the predecessor of Amenemhat IV, whom we're going to be speaking about later on. All right. Amenemhat III, like other pharaohs of Dynasty 12 in the Middle Kingdom, were known for building what they call the mud brick pyramids. All right. So that's something we want to point out for edification purposes, if we will. All right. We have here Senusret III. Okay. And we want to show this, say, pick green, if we will. We just want to color code it or sort of in italics or underline or so. Senusret III was one of the pharaohs, brothers and sisters, that during his era, they continued as his successor and predecessor, built what is referred to as the mud brick pyramids, and who made war with the Ethiopians or the Nubians. All right. So these are things we just want to point out for reference purposes. Now, Solomon, all right, Susanes, Men Kepre of Dynasty 21. Now, some people in history may agree or disagree with this era of Solomon, agreeing with the timeline of it being the Dynasty 21. The reason why I tend to lean toward that to the studies that I've done is because I equate Shishak with Shishak that you read of in the book of Chronicles that invaded where the Israelites were. All right. So that's something we want to point out in that particular realm. And Shishak is in Dynasty 22. So when you deal with what is referred to in this case as the third intermediate period, and the third intermediate period is what we're going to be talking about in part with this right here. All right. I'm going to bold type all of that right there and put that within the italics. All right. Or type into third. Right. In that particular aspect, you had the different kings that were ruling, brothers and sisters, at the same time. Some in Tanis, which is in the north of Egypt, and some in Thebes, which is in southern Egypt. So we just want to point that out, that they had what is referred to, if you will, as co-regencies. Okay, so if we will, let us continue on in this particular case. Isaiah. Now, this is about Isaiah the prophet, right? Ilput the second, Tefnacht Tahaka. Now, Tahaka, brothers and sisters, all right, was, as we pointed out last night, in Dynasty 25 of Egypt. Tefnacht, brothers and sisters, is who Kashta and or you will get into the era of Pianki, who was defeated by the kings of Dynasty 25. Tefnacht equates to the timeline, brothers and sisters, all right, of Dynasty 24. All right, so these are just things we want to point out for edification purposes, if we will. Jeremiah, Necho II, and Hafra. Hafra, brothers and sisters, is called a priest. Pharaoh of priests is the same as Hafra. All right. He's called that by Herodotus, the Egyptian, no, pardon me, Herodotus, the Greek historian that went to Egypt. All right. So we just want to point that out for reference purposes. So in a nutshell, what we're talking about here is you had Abraham from the era in Egypt, or the first intermediate period. Now that goes into dynasties 7 through 11. All right. And then Joseph in the era of Dynasty 12 in its beginning of it. All right. Then Moses in the era of Dynasty 12 going into Dynasty 13. All right. Solomon during the era of Egypt's 21st dynasty. Isaiah during the era of the 24th and 25th dynasty of it. Then Jeremiah during the era of Dynasty 26 of Egypt. So these are just things, brothers and sisters, that we want to point out for edification purposes, if we will. Okay, let us go on to the next slide. Lands of Egypt mentioned in the Bible. Okay, it goes to say as follows. Piton, mentioned in the Bible, in the book of Exodus. Per Atum in the Egyptian. Avaris, which is called Ramesses in the Bible, is referred to as Hutwaret in the Egyptian. Tanis, which is referred to as Zoan in the Bible, is called Djenet in the Egyptian. Memphis, which is called Nof in the Bible, is called Menofer in the Egyptian. Thebes, which is called No in the Bible, the land of No, you see that in the Bible as well, is called Waset in the Egyptian. All right. Then we have Heliopolis, which is called On in the Bible. You see that in the book of Genesis. It is called Ayunu in the Egyptian. All right. You have Elephantine, which is part of Patros, which we're going to talk about in a second, is referred to as Abu in the Egyptian. All right. We want to point out that Yeb is also Elephantine. All right. So we just want to point that out for edification purposes, if we will. All right. Then we have Migdol, called in just the syllables here, MKTR in Egyptian. Now, what do we want to point out, brothers and sisters, in this particular matter, if we will, is this. L in Egyptian does not exist. So you have it to where R is used in this place when you're doing a transliteration from one language, say in this case Hebrew, Migdol means tower, like Tower. But when you transliterate that to an Egyptian word, the L becomes an R. All right. So this is just something we want to point out for edification purposes, if we will. All right. Then we have Patros, mentioned in the Bible, called Piteret in the Egyptian. Then we have Tapanes, mentioned in the Bible, from the Egyptian meaning fortress of Pinahasi. The word Pinahasi means Negro or black inside of Egyptian. So these are just things, brothers and sisters, wanting to point out for edification purposes, if we will. All right. Let us continue on in this particular matter. Thank you for the time. All right. What we want to point out here, brothers and sisters, is this. You see this area here, Dynasty 15, Dynasty 17. That is the point that we want to show in this particular matter. And why? Is because the 15th dynasty was ruling, while at the same time, Dynasty 17 was ruling in a particular matter. All right. They were co-regencies going intermingling one with another. So while one was ruling in one place, another one was ruling at the same time. So you had inside of Egyptian history more than one pharaoh on the throne. All right. So that's something we want to point out, if we will, for edification purposes. All right. Next, we have, as shown here, Elephantine. Elephantine called Yeb, right? Y-E-B. All right. In ancient times is a place we're going to show later on where the Israelites in time began to migrate and where they began to be. All right. So this is how it can correlate in the history with the time frame and so forth and so on. All right. Let's go on, if we will. This right here, brothers and sisters, and I'm going to read to you the reason why I actually cited this particular one in this particular matter. Elephantine colony of Jewish mercenaries in Persian service in the 5th century with a temple to Yahweh disappears after 401, meaning after 401 BCE. All right, so that, brothers and sisters, is what this part right here is talking about for reason and purposes. We wanted to emphasize the matter of Elephantine and showing it on a map for that particular case, if we will. Let us go on. Notes. First intermediate period. The 9th and 10th dynasties are from the Heracleopolis and one from Thebes. There were times of dual sovereignty. So as pointed out, you had it to where there were different dynasties ruling at the same time. Now let's go on. The margin of error rises from about a decade in the New Kingdom and third intermediate period to as much as 150 years for the beginning of the first dynasty. Most of the 12th dynasty dates are fixed precisely, and 18th and 19th dynasty ones must fit one of the three astronomically determined alternatives. Here, a combination of the middle and lowest ones are used. So what are we pointing out in this? Not only in ancient Egypt, brothers and sisters, did they have certain kings ruling at the same time, but the dates that they're using, they're saying inside of Egyptian timeline may not always be its 100%, because they're saying there may be an error in this particular matter. So that's why you have some people who say that the king's line, if you equate it to biblical timeline, has different dates. That's what we want to point out in that particular case, if we will. All right. Notes. The Middle Kingdom, dynasties 11 through 13. Now, the Middle Kingdom, brothers and sisters, as well as the second intermediate period, both share Dynasty 11. Dynasty 11 was in both cases of that. All right. The second intermediate period, Dynasties 13 through 17. Third intermediate period, Dynasties 21 to 25. We spoke about that last night. All right. And the late period in Dynasty 26. All right. So we just want to go over and show that for reason and purposes, if we will. Notes. Now, brothers and sisters, what we're going to get into in this particular realm and in this particular matter is showing the correlation from sources, citations between the African nations, if we will, in this particular part, mainly Egyptians, and the Israelites. All right. So let's see what we can gain from this. It says here, brothers and sisters, all right, make that a little bigger, if we will. The Ethiopians, who are next neighbors to the Egyptians, made an inroad into their country, which they seized upon and carried off the effects of the Egyptians, who, in their rage, fought against them and revenged the efforts they had received from them. But being overcome in battle, some of them were slain, and the rest ran away in a shameful manner. But, it says, and by that means saved themselves. Whereupon the Ethiopians followed after them in the pursuit, and thinking it would be a mark of cowardice if they did not subdue all Egypt, they went on to subdue the rest with greater vehemence. And when they had tested the sweets of the country, they never left off the prosecution of the war. And as the nearest parts had not courage enough at first to fight with them, they proceeded as far as Memphis and the sea itself, while not one of the cities was able to oppose them. So, brothers and sisters, what we are reading of in this particular matter comes from the book of Josephus, and it talks about the Ethiopians that revenged themselves or made war in retaliation to what the Egyptians had done to them. All right. So some of the things we want to emphasize on here, we want to show underline is Memphis, and it mentions Ethiopians followed after them. Now, one of the things we want to point out is that the Egyptians, the people of Sematawi, And the people of Ethiopia, the people of Cush, which the Egyptians refer to as Kos or Kas, if we will, brothers and sisters, they were not one nation. They were two different nations, though within the same continent. All right, though even looking alike. That was not their unification. They was more about ethnic backgrounds and not so much about a color tone, if we will. The reason why we go to today in regards with color tone matters is just because of so many lies and so much misinformation regarding how those people look in the ancient world. All right, so we just want to point that out. Now, brothers and sisters, having after read this, we want to make that smaller, and we want to, if we will, brothers and sisters, make this side bigger and then read it. To make use of Moses the Hebrew and take his assistance, the king commanded his daughter to produce him, that he might be the general of their army. Now, brothers and sisters, if you know what was going on, brothers and sisters, in Dynasty 12 of Egypt, which when we get back up here, brothers and sisters, all right, Moses, Senusret III, Amenemhat III, so Bekhotep III, and then Hotep. If you know what was going on, if we're going to bold type this, if we will, or bold it, if we will, that was during when the Nubians or the Cushites or the Ethiopians and the Egyptians were always having beef one with another, always having war one with another, always having conflict one with another. So now, brothers and sisters, when we read, say, a source, if we will, right, in the book of Josephus, having already shown a chronological timeline of Moses being in Dynasty 12 and in Dynasty 13, we can see how that comes and shows us connection in that particular realm. All right, let's go on, if we will, to the next part. Notes. We want to show this a little bigger, if we will. When he had therefore proceeded thus on his journey, he came upon the Ethiopians before they expected him, and joining battle with them, he beat them and deprived them of the hopes they had of success against the Egyptians, and went on and overthrowing their cities, and indeed made a great slaughter of those Ethiopians. Now, when the Egyptian army had once tasted of their prosperous success by the means of Moses, they did not slacken their diligence, insomuch that the Ethiopians were in danger of being reduced to slavery and all sorts of destruction. And at length they retired to Saba, which was the royal city of Ethiopia, which Cambyses afterwards named Meroe, after the name of his own sister. Now, this Cambyses that we're seeing of here, and the citation that we just read came from the book of Josephus. Brothers and sisters, was Cambyses II, the son of Cyrus II. Cambyses ruled in Egypt in Dynasty 27. All right. But we're getting into the aspect of how it shows geographically what we're talking about. What we see right here about the aspect of Sabah and what we're talking about Meroe, sometimes spelled with an E after it. This is another example, if we will, of anachronism. We want to show that in italics, and we want to show that in italics. All right. Cambyses was a Persian who ruled in Egypt long after the events here. So the author, in this case Josephus, is showing that what was called the land of Sabah is in later on time called the land of Meroe. All right. As pointed out, sometimes Meroe ends with an E in spelling. So this is what we want to emphasize. It was only natural that his son and successor, Cambyses II, should follow in his father's footsteps and attempt to expand his territories. To that end, he waged war on Egypt and the kingdom of Cush, which is located in present-day Sudan. All right, so brothers and sisters, the territory referred to here as Sabah and over here as Meroe being the same place is in modern-day Sudan. There was, in what we call the country of Sudan today, part of the Egyptian people and empire, and part of Sudan known as where the Ethiopians or the Cushites would be. All right, so this is something we want to point out for edification purposes. Modern Sudan, brothers and sisters, was part of ancient Egypt Modern Sudan was part of ancient Kush. So we want to emphasize what we're speaking upon in that particular matter, if we will. All right. Let us go on in this particular case. Here we see a map, the Sahara, Thebes, as we talked about, Memphis, as we talked about, Nubia, Kush, Axum, which was part of their kingdom as time went on, Jerusalem. We've been speaking about that quite frequently on this channel. Petra. Petra, brothers and sisters, is where ancient Esau was. All right. So that's something we want to point out for reference purposes. So all these nations had a linkage, though they were different nations. They looked alike, they did business, they had war, they had peace. So these are things we just want to emphasize and point out for edification purposes in showing the map of what we're talking about. Okay? Let us go on to the next part. Thank you for the time. And Menehat the fourth, and then Fahotep. Now, the point, brothers and sisters, in showing the pictures here is because you have Amenemhat the fourth of Dynasty 12, and then Fahotep. Now, I pointed out in the book that I wrote, Egypt Talking Writing, that Nephahotep's son, named Herenaph, did not rule after him. You understand? But rather, his brother named Sehathor ruled after him. So now, brothers and sisters, that being in Dynasty 13 of Egypt, when you deal with Dynasty 12 is when, if we're going to sit there and cite another source, if we will, brothers and sisters, here's what we want to read upon in this particular matter. All right. There were many immigrants from Palestine, apparently peaceful arrivals, who were absorbed into the lowest levels of Egyptian society. In the later 13th dynasty, the Eastern Delta was heavily settled by Asiatics. Now, Asiatics, brothers and sisters, is a terminology that is also referred to in Egyptian as Amu. All right. So during the era of Dynasty 12, during the era of Dynasty 13, you already had a lot of people of the Amu or the Asiatics already being in Egypt. All right. So that's something we want to point out for reference purposes. Let us go on, if we will, to the next part. The Hebrew enslavement. Now it happened that the Egyptians grew delicate and lazy as to painstaking and gave themselves up to other pleasures, and in pleasure to the love of gain. They also became very ill affected toward the Hebrews, as touched with envy at their prosperity. For when they saw how the nation of the Israelites flourished and were become eminent already in plenty of wealth, which they had acquired by their virtue and natural love of labor, they thought their increase was to their own detriment, and having in length of time forgotten the benefits they had received from Joseph, particularly the crown being now come into another family, they became very abusive to the Israelites and contrived many ways of afflicting them, for they enjoined them to cut a great number of channels for the river and to build walls for their cities and ramparts, that they might restrain the river and hinder its waters from stagnating upon its running over its own banks. They set them also to build pyramids, and by all this wore them out, and forced them to learn all sorts of mechanical arts, and to accustom themselves to hard labor. And 400 years they did spend under these afflictions, for they strove one against the other, which should get the mastery. The Egyptians desiring to destroy the Israelites by these labors, and the Israelites desiring to hold out to the end under them. So, what do we want to point out in this particular case, if we will, brothers and sisters? all right, is a couple of things. First, we want to talk about this from the book of Josephus, right? First, we want to talk about this matter here of the 400 years, and we're going to bold type that. The 400 years, brothers and sisters, were the 4 generations of when the oppression on the Israelites began, from the era of Joseph all the way into the era of the Exodus. All right, so now we know good and well the Egyptian calendar and the Hebrew calendar is different. In the Bible, as been pointing out in the presentation, all right, called 1619 in Genesis 15. 1619 is what some Israelites are saying that the enslavement of the black man happened in the West. So therefore, by 2019 or 2020, we should have been up out of captivity, which we're not, but that's another subject. All right. So the 400 years is talking about the Israelites inside of Egypt of ancient world. And those 400 years equates to the 4 generations, because Levi and Joseph were the same generation. Then you had it to where Levi, then you had Kohath, then you had Amram, then you had Moses. So those are 4 generations equating to 400 years. All right. Inside the book, From Assyria to America, Part 2, I'll point that out as well. All right. The other thing we want to talk about in this aspect here, right? It says they set them to build pyramids. Now, a lot of times when speaking about the Israelite enslavement in Egypt, there are a lot of times people who will say, no, the Israelites didn't build pyramids. But what people are not realizing is you had pyramids from the Old Kingdom, pyramids from the Middle Kingdom, pyramids from the New Kingdom. Now, when we say Old Kingdom, as pointed out, we talking about from Dynasty 1 all the way to Dynasty 6. Then you're talking about the Middle Kingdom from in part Dynasty 11 all the way to the end of Dynasty 13. Then the New Kingdom, starting with the era of Dynasty 18, all the way culminating to the end of Dynasty 20, because then you start the third intermediate period in Dynasty 21. All right, so brothers and sisters, you had some pyramids that were made of stone. You had some pyramids that were made of brick. Now, during the era of what we're going to be talking about in part, right here, all right, in the Middle Kingdom, they had what was built in many, many cases. Pardon that. We wanted to show what we're talking about. And this right here, right? That right there is the time frame in which they were building mud brick pyramids. So now, brothers and sisters, when we go back to the citation here in the book of Josephus, and it says they set them also to build pyramids. That was not talking about the pyramid, say like the pyramid of Giza or the pyramid of Dendera or so forth and so on. What that's talking about in that particular realm is the mud brick pyramids of Amenemhat, the mud brick pyramids, brothers and sisters, of Senusret, and those are the ones we're speaking about in this particular matter. All right, so let us go on in this particular matter. Hebrew captive in the mud brick pyramid. What we're showing here, brothers and sisters, all right, as been shown before on this channel, is this is part of the mud brick pyramid of Senusret II. Now, brothers and sisters, those who know good and well that there were over 50 pyramids built in the Middle Kingdom of Egypt. Many of them, brothers and sisters, being the mud brick type. In the Bible, in the book of Exodus, it says that the Israelites were made to work with brick. So this is something we want to point out for evidence purposes. What you're looking at on the left-hand side, a Hebrew captive. Now, this has been pointed out before from the Hecht Museum, and I'm going to type that in. All right, capital, if we will, Hecht Museum, a Hebrew captive. Now, the Hecht Museum, brothers and sisters, is inside of Haifa, which is inside of the land of Israel. All right, so that's something we want to point out for reference purposes. And that too is dedicated to the Middle Kingdom of Egypt. And we can see how that captive looks. Okay, let's go on, if we will, to the next slide. Now, what we're looking at here, brothers and sisters, in this presentation called, Black History in the Old Testament, Part 2. This is referred to in part as the Merneptah stele. Some refer to it as the Israel stele. But in part, here is what it says. The princes are prostrated, saying mercy. Not one of the 9 bows raises his head. Desolation is for Tehenu. And we want to sit there and go over this particular matter. If we will, bold type that. Hati is pacified. And we want to bold type Hati as well. Plundered is the Canaan with every evil. Carried off is Ashkelon. We want to bold type that too. Seized upon is Gezer. We want to bold type that too. Yanoam is made as that which does not exist. Israel is laid waste. His seed is not. Huru is become a widow for Egypt. So, brothers and sisters, do you know who we're talking about when we speak of Tehenu? As we see right here, we're going to show that color-coded. All right? Thank you, brothers and sisters, for the time to be in this. In red. Tehenu, or Tejenu, said by some, brothers and sisters, is Libya of today, the Libyans. The ancient Egyptians also referred to them as Libu, L-I-B-U. All right? So that's something we want to point out in that particular matter. Hati is the Hittites. The Hittites is mentioned in the Bible as well. Plundered is the Canaan with every evil. And Canaan is mentioned in the Bible over 200 times. Carried off is Ashkelon. Ashkelon is where in part the people of the Philistines live. So all of these nations were acquainted one with another, sometimes in peace, sometimes in business, sometimes in war. Seized upon is Gezer. Yanoam is made as that which does not exist. Israel is laid waste. Of course, we know that was a lie. That was a boast, if you will. His seed is not. Now, what we want to show, if we will, all right, in this part here, this is the Y, the double flaxen reed inside of Egyptian. All right. The S inside of the Egyptian. The R, the open mouth R. Then you have the one flaxen reed, if you will, right here, brothers and sisters. All right. Representing the I. Then you have this here, the vulture or bird, representing A, as in the letter A, if we will. All right. Then you have the R here, Israel. Remember, as pointed out before, right? When we go to the slide here, right? Migdal, written in the Bible, right? In Egyptian, that L would be R. That R in Egyptian is the transliteration from the Asiatic Lamed or L, for those who study the lingual matter. So these are things we just want to point out. So now when we speak about Yisrael, which in Hebrew ends with the L sound, you have it to where the open mouth R in Egyptian is used. All right? So that's done in many cases inside of the Egyptian writings themselves. Now, what we're looking at here, brothers and sisters, this right here shows the image of a male. That shows that it is a people that Merneptah or Amenhotep III. That's an issue because some people say that the Merneptah stele truly should be called the stele of Amenhotep, regardless of whether it's in Dynasty 18, Amenhotep III, or Dynasty 19, Merneptah, the son of Ramses. Brothers and sisters, regardless of that particular matter, what we want to point out is that Israel was mentioned inside of that. No scholar worth their credit says the opposite or so. Egyptologists, biblical scholars, and others all attest that what they refer to as the Merneptah stele, some call it the Israel stele, all right, which was found in the year 1896, speaks of the Israelites. Now, with this, we want to point out as well, all right, going back up here, and thank you for the time, brothers and sisters. The margin of error arises about a decade in the New Kingdom. That's talking about the timeline. This is why, like, for instance, in Dynasty 18 of Amos, you have it, brothers and sisters, to where it was mentioning different aspects of different times. All right? One record says that Amos, who only lived, sadly, to be 35 years old, some people say that he began to rule in 1539 BCE. Some say 1571 BCE. So when you start talking about the timeline with the BCE era, you're going to find different dates. So when they asked the Israelites to produce a date and wanting to make a beef for discredit the story of the house of Israel, the dates that you're talking about in Egyptian chronology doesn't always all pan through between the different aspects of the king's list. But this is not a knock or a disrespect or a bash, if we will. We just want to point that out. Okay? Doesn't mean the people didn't exist because they had different dates for such. All right? So Harriet Tubman is said to be either born in 1820, 1821. Somebody said 1822. That doesn't mean Harriet Tubman didn't exist. You understand? So these are just things we want to emphasize for reference purposes. Now, Nubian captive and Libyan captive. Now, Libya, as we pointed out in here, is the Tehenu. This right here is Nubian. As we pointed out over here, brothers and sisters, Nubia is Cush. So we can sit there and see, brothers and sisters, how the people looked and that they were taken as captives throughout different times, one with another. Sometimes the Egyptians won, sometimes the Ethiopians won, if we will. Let's go on, if we will, to the next part. Isaiah chapter 19, verse 1 through 8. The burden of Egypt, behold, the Most High rideth upon a swift cloud, and shall come into Egypt, and the idols of Egypt shall be moved at his presence, and the heart of Egypt shall melt in the midst of it. And I will set the Egyptians against the Egyptians, and they shall fight everyone against his brother, and everyone against his neighbor, city against city, and kingdom against kingdom. What did we just read in Isaiah chapter 19, verse 2 here? That began to culminate in prophecy in Dynasty 20, and in 21, and in 22, and in 23. Because you had it to where the Egyptians, be they led by Dynasty 22 with the Libyans, or be they led in Dynasty 25 with the Ethiopians, they was going against each other, sadly, in that particular matter, if we will. So you had city against city, for instance, Tanis, which is called Zoan in the Bible, going against Thebes, which was called Waset in the Egyptian. So you had parts in Upper Egypt going against parts in Lower Egypt and vice versa. So when it speaks about city against city and kingdom against kingdom, you had different dynasties that was actually at conflict one with another. And the spirit of Egypt shall fail in the midst thereof, and I will destroy the counsel thereof, and they shall seek to the idols, and to the charmers, and to them that have familiar spirits, and to the wizards. And the Egyptians will I give over into the hand of a cruel lord, and a fierce king shall rule over them, saith the Most High, Yah Zebaoth, the Lord of hosts. And the waters shall fail from the sea, and the river shall be wasted and dried up, and they shall turn the rivers far away, and the brooks of defense shall be emptied and dried up. The reeds and the flax shall wither. The paper reeds, which is the papyrus, all right? The paper reeds by the brooks, by the mouth of the brooks, and everything sown by the brook shall wither, be driven away, and be no more. The fishes also shall mourn, and they shall cast angle into the brooks, shall lament, and they that spread nets upon the waters shall languish. What is this talking about, brothers and sisters? The economy, the social aspect, the productive aspect of Egypt during this particular time was prophesied to fall and to become lower and lower. That's what this is talking about in this particular realm. When you deal with people who go into the history of Egypt, they will tell you that during the era of the third intermediate period is when Egypt just began to decline and decline and decline. And this is what the prophecy in Isaiah is talking about in this particular matter. All right, let's go on, if we will. Isaiah chapter 19, verse 9 through 16. Moreover, they that work in the fine flax, and they that weave network shall be confounded, and they shall be broken in the purposes thereof. All that make slices of ponds for fish. Surely the princes of Zoan are fools. The counsel of the wise counselors of Pharaoh is become brutish. How say ye unto Pharaoh, I am a son of the wise, the son of the ancient kings? Where are they? Where are thy wise men? And let them tell thee now, and let them know what Yazebaot, the Lord of hosts, has proposed upon Egypt. Goes on to say, the princes of Zoan are become fools. The princes of Noph are deceived. They have all seduced Egypt, even they that are the stay of the tribes thereof. Yah has mingled a perverse spirit in the midst thereof, and they have caused Egypt to err in every work thereof, as a drunken man staggereth in his vomit. Neither shall there be any work for Egypt, which the head or tail branch or rush may do. And that day shall Egypt be like unto women, and it shall be afraid and fear because of the shaking of the hand of Yahweh, which he shaketh over it. What do we, brothers and sisters, want to point out in this particular realm is this. It says the princes of Zoan are become fools. The princes of Noph. These cities, Zoan, Noph, these are all confirmed cities within the scriptures, as we pointed out earlier. All right. Zoan is Tanis. All right. So we just want to point that out. And then Noph is Memphis, which is Menophar in the Egyptian, if you will. All right. It says in verse 14, the Most High have mingled a perverse spirit in the midst thereof. Brothers and sisters, when you look at the artwork of some of the stuff in ancient Egypt, it's pretty weird, if you will. If you're talking about the aspect of genitalia, nudity, if we will, that being displayed and shown, say in the palace of Ramses III, if you will, or so forth and so on, or in the matter, brothers and sisters, of the coffin text or the pyramid text, which speaks about things that the culture of Israel would not subscribe to. So we can see why, in this case, why in the Old Testament for certain, it says that a perverse spirit is mingled therein. You understand? Because this is no disrespect intended. The ancient Egyptian god of fertility was called Manu, and the Greeks called it Min. And in that particular culture, he is shown with an erect phallus. And that is supposed to be, brothers and sisters, the sign of fertility. But that's being erect does not show fertility. Fertility, fertilization is done inside the female. So maybe a pregnancy shows more so the aspect of fertility, more so than just showing the Egyptian image of a male with an erect phallus, saying that's the sign of fertility. That right there is part of what it's talking about when it says the perverse spirit has been mingled therein. All right. So let's go over in this case here, Isaiah 19, verse 17 to verse 25. And the land of Judah shall be a terror unto Egypt. Everyone that maketh mention thereof shall be afraid in himself, because of the counsel of the Most High of hosts, which he hath determined against it. And that day 5 cities in the land of Egypt shall speak the language of Canaan, and swear to the Most High of hosts. One shall be called the city of destruction. In that day there shall be an altar to the Most High in the midst of the land of Egypt, and a pillar at the border thereof to the Most High. And it shall be for a sign and for a witness unto Yah of hosts in the land of Egypt. And they shall cry unto Yah because of the oppressors. And he shall send them a savior and a great one, and he shall deliver them. And Yah shall be known to Egypt, and the Egyptians shall know Yah in that day, and shall do sacrifice and oblation. Yea, they shall vow a vow unto the Most High and perform it. And Yah shall smite Egypt. He will smite and heal it. And they shall return even to Yah, and he shall be entreated of them, and shall heal them. And that day there shall be a highway out of Egypt to Assyria. And the Assyrian shall come into Egypt, and the Egyptian into Assyria. And the Egyptian shall serve with the Assyrians. Verse 23, we want to talk about right here, where it says, in that day, we want to show this bold, if we will, right? In that day, there shall be a highway out of Egypt to Assyria. And the Assyrians shall come into Egypt, and the Egyptian into Assyria. And the Egyptians shall serve with the Assyrians. What is it talking about in that particular case? It's talking about there being peace later on between the kingdoms of the Assyrians and the Egyptians. And brothers and sisters, we're going to show Israel as well. In that day, Israel shall be the third with Egypt and with Assyria, even a blessing in the midst of the land, whom the Lord of hosts shall bless, saying, blessed be Egypt, my people, and Assyria, the work of my hands, and Israel, mine inheritance. Now, a lot of times people go to Isaiah chapter 19, verse 25, and see where it says, blessed be Egypt, my people, right? And say, see, the Egyptians were the people of the Most High. This is talking about in Egypt where they're not worshiping men with the erect phallus. This is talking about in Egypt, brothers and sisters, where they're not praising in sexuality Bastet, the cat goddess of Egypt. So, brothers and sisters, this is what it's talking about, just as much as the Bible talks about Israel not having any idols and being the people of the Most High. In the book of Hosea, you shall be called the children of the living God. You can't do that along with your idolatry. So you're not going to go and deal with the aspect of ancient Egypt and their customs and then still going to equate it to Isaiah chapter 19, 25. So that is to say this. In Assyria, the work of my hands. They're not going to be worshiping, if you will, Ashur and so forth and so on. This is the point we wanted to emphasize when it says, and the Egyptians shall serve with the Assyrians. What that means is they will be serving the Most High. That is what that is talking about. So after all of the drama between Assyria, pardon me, and the Egyptians, between the Egyptians and the Israelites, between the Assyrians and the Egyptians, the Most High in Isaiah chapter 19 is saying that Israel will be a third with that, and it will be for a blessing and for peace. That will be in the future. That is what that is talking about. All right. So this part here in verse 18, and 5 cities in Egypt shall speak the language of Canaan. Brothers and sisters, do you know that what we refer to and understand as Hebrew is actually a mixture between African and Asiatic languages, which is why Hebrew is listed as an Afro-Asiatic language? So these are things brothers and sisters, that we want to emphasize for edification purposes. Now, the Israelites, how we can show what we're talking about, being in the land of Egypt, as we've gone over on this channel in the past, right? What we can sit there, see, know, and show for reason and purposes, brothers and sisters, is that the Israelites were never noted in prophecy to go to Europe and sit there and build something. Now, the first Europeans to be noted to go into Egypt, to a great extent, came during the era of Herodotus and after. So the people mainly that the Egyptians saw from other lands looked like the Egyptians. And we're going to get into what we're talking about as we continue on in this presentation. Shishak and Necho II. Shishak, brothers and sisters, is, if we will, and point out, all right, Dynasty 22. And Necho, as we're going to point out, brothers and sisters, is Dynasty 26. Now, Necho, brothers and sisters, was the king who assassinated Josiah, king of Judah, during the era of the Carchemish matter. The Carchemish matter in history, brothers and sisters, you can look this up, is when the Assyrians and the Babylonians were fighting. And the Egyptians attempted to go and be an assistance to the Assyrians, but got defeated. Josiah, king of Judah, when Necho had to go through, and this is where we want to go back, if we will, brothers and sisters, into the map here. All right, Necho coming up out of this land here, the Battle of Carchemish happening over here, if we will, right? He would have had to go through the Sinai and go up through there in this particular case. When Josiah of Judah saw that, he attempted to go and do battle against Necho. You understand? And was defeated, sadly. So these are things we want to point out. Brothers and sisters, what can we, Israel, glean from that particular matter? The battle that was between the Assyrians and the Babylonians in the Carchemish matter. And I'm going to type this in the chat here. Carchemish. That was not Israel's fight. We can equate that to today with the Republicans and the Democrats. That's not the black man's fight. That's not our problem. That situation that happened back in January 6th, that's not our problem, brothers and sisters, with the matter with the Capitol. That, as we've been pointing out, as stated, is not our fight. Let's not join into another people's problem and learn from Josiah of Judah. That's something we want to point out. All right. The Tennis Hyksos and Shishak II. All right. The Tennis Hyksos was, brothers and sisters, in Dynasty 15 and 16 of Egypt. We've already pointed out that the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt, brothers and sisters, was during Dynasty 13. So now you had Dynasty 13 and 14. After that, 14, 15, 16, and 17 was all in the same time frame. I want to emphasize that. From Dynasty 14 to Dynasty 17 was all concurrent one with another. So now these Amalekites that attacked the Israelites, brothers and sisters, all right, and this is pointed out in the book I'm going to advertise and show later, were the Amalekites, were those Tennis Hyksos. So this is what we want to emphasize in that case. What can we point out in this regard? The people of Amalek or Amalek in Genesis, pardon me, yes, in Genesis, but in this particular case, Exodus 17. Brothers and sisters, these Tennis Hyksos were Edomites. This is a depiction of how ancient Edom would have looked. We want to emphasize when you say braids or locks or long plaited hair. if we will, in this particular matter. Here we see Shishak II, a Libyan who ruled in Egypt in Dynasty 22. All right. So these are just things we want to show Black History Part 2 or presentation for Black History Month, the Black people in the Old Testament. Let's go on. Tahaka and Apries, if we will. All right. Apries and Hafra is the same person. We went over Tahaka on this channel last night. All right. In a presentation. Apries or Hafra is mentioned in the Bible in the book of Jeremiah. So we begin to see how the Israelite record left in the said Old Testament correlates to the timing of what we're talking about in history. All right. So let us go on, if we will, in this particular matter. Darius the First and Darius the Third. Now, what is the point in going over this? Darius the Third is of Persia. Darius the First and Third is of Persia. This is Dynasty 31 of Egypt. Can we note, brothers and sisters, how the people looked, if we will, for edification purposes? Let's go on, if we will, to the next part. Ezekiel 29, verse 10 through 16. Behold, therefore, I am against thee and against thy rivers, and I will make the land of Egypt utterly waste and desolate, from the tower of Syene even unto the border of Ethiopia. No foot of man shall pass through it, nor foot of beast shall pass through it, neither shall be it inhabited 40 years. And I will make the land of Egypt desolate in the midst of the countries that are desolate, and her cities among the cities that are laid waste shall be desolate 40 years. And I will scatter the Egyptians among the nations and disperse them through the countries. Yet, thus saith Yah Elohim, the Lord God, at the end of 40 years will I gather the Egyptians from the people where they were scattered, and I will bring them again, and I will bring again the captivity of Egypt, and will cause them to return to the land of Patros, into the land of their habitation, and they shall be there a base kingdom. It shall be the basest, the bestest, or the basis of the kingdoms. Neither shall it exalt itself any more above the nations, for I will diminish them, and they shall no more rule over the nations. It goes on to say, and it shall be no more the confidence of the house of Israel, which bringeth the iniquity to remembrance, when they shall look after them. But they shall know that I am Yah Elohim, the Lord God. It goes on to say, brothers and sisters, Ezekiel chapter 29, 17 through verse 21. And it shall come to pass, pardon me, and it came to pass, my fault, and it came to pass in the 7th and 20th year, in the first month, and the first day of the month. The word of Yah came unto me, saying, Son of man, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, called his army to serve a great service against Tyrus, which is Tyre. Every head was made bald, and every shoulder was peeled. Yet had he no wages, nor his army for Tyrus, for the service that he had served against it. Therefore, thus saith Yah Elohim, thus saith the Lord God, behold, I will make the land of Egypt, I will give the land of Egypt unto Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and he shall take her multitude, and take her spoil, and take her prey, and it shall be the wages for his army. I have given him the land of Egypt for his labor wherewith he served against it, because they wrought for me, saith Yah Elohim. In that day I will cause the horn of the house of Israel to bud forth, and I will give thee the opening of the mouth in the midst of them, and they shall know that I am Yah. Now, brothers and sisters, we want to point some things out. Ezekiel 29, brothers and sisters, is what is regarding the era of Dynasty 26. Dynasty 26, brothers and sisters, which is after the third intermediate period, is when Egypt still, as we pointed out earlier, began to decline and began to decline and began to decline. You understand? So now when we get into verse 15, and it says, and it shall be the basis of the kingdoms. In other words, it's the lowest. Egypt is, it says, will not rule over the nations. So they're not going to have the hegemony over the Hittites and have hegemony over the Kassite people and have hegemony over the people in Saudi Arabia and have hegemony over where Israel was at a certain time as well. You understand? It's not going to have the hegemony over as they did in Dynasty 11 with Mentuhotep ruling over the people of Canaan. So, brothers and sisters, by the time you get to this era right here, it began to decline. It began to decline. All right. So these are just things we want to point out for edification purposes. Now, in here, we want to bold type this or have this bold. Why? Because it says, I will make the land of Egypt utterly waste and desolate, from the tower of Syene even unto the border of Ethiopia. Brothers and sisters, that's talking about the modern Sudan, if we will. When you start talking about like that matter with the desert, desolate, knowing growing from it, and so forth and so on, that's what that's speaking of in that particular realm. People, sociologists, archaeologists, and others have stated that where that desert is in Egypt and the Sudan at one time was very prosperous and beautiful for growth and vegetation, and so forth and so on. The Most High stated that he would change that particular matter. The reason why that is because of the boastfulness that the ancient Egyptians had. You can see that, and this is no disrespect intended, in their artwork. There are some people sadly thinking that there would have been giants in ancient Egypt because you see a 40 or 60-foot image of the statue of a man. That is, if you want a terminology, say it as a boasted ego, inflated ego that will want to sit there and have it like that. So, brothers and sisters, these are just some of the things we want to point out for edification purposes. Right here, it speaks about Nebuchadnezzar having control over the land of Egypt, and he did, politically and socially. After the matter of Carchemish, between the Babylonians and the Assyrians, when Ashur-bani-pal lost to Nebuchadnezzar and to his father Nabopolassar, if you will, right? The ancient Egyptians did not really come up out of their land to try to sit there and retrieve anything, because the king of Babylon, even in the Bible in 2 Kings 24, points out that the king of Babylon had taken that which belonged into the land of Egypt. So this is something we want to point out for reference purposes. Let's go on, if we will. Jeremiah chapter 44, verse 1 through 2. And it says this: the word that came to Jeremiah concerning all the Jews which dwelt in the land of Egypt, which dwelt at Migdol, and at Tapanes, and at Noph, and in the country of Patros, saying, thus saith the Lord of hosts, Yah Zebaoth, Elohei Yisrael, the God of Israel. Ye have seen all the evil that I have brought upon Jerusalem, and upon all the cities of Judah. And behold, this day they are a desolation, and no man dwelleth therein. Brothers and sisters, when it says in the Bible, in Isaiah 13, about Babylon, about no man dwelling therein, when it says in the Bible, in Ezekiel, about no man dwelling in Egypt, when it says in Jeremiah, about no man dwelling in the cities of Judah and in Jerusalem, the terminology no man dwelling therein, brothers and sisters, is talking about a man kingdom, a manly establishment. It's not just saying that there will never be a human being in there. When it says this is of the men, the quality that it's talking about is of a kingly, princely, ruling matter. That's what it talks about. It's just as much, not to sound disrespectful, when they say they ain't no good black men. That is basically saying that they're not saying there are no black men that are good. It's talking about the status where the people could and should be. It's not seen. That's what it means in Isaiah 13 about Babylon, about no man being there. In Ezekiel 29 about in Egypt, no man being there. and in Jeremiah 44 in the cities of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem about no man being there. That's what it's talking about in that particular case. All right, so we just want to point that out for reason and purposes. Elephantine and Elephantine papyri. All right, we want to show, here's Elephantine. This is the Gulf of Aqaba and so forth. The sea that leads into the Mediterranean Sea, the Reed Sea, which is over in this particular area. And so, because the exodus of Israel happened over here, not here. All right. But this part here we want to get into is regarding the Elephantine matter. All right. And this is shown here in a map. As we want to also show Lower Nubia, Upper Nubia. All right. In this particular case. This right here, brothers and sisters, is part of the Elephantine papyrus. And we're going to read part of it. To our Lord begoers. Meant to put an A. Sorry. Governor of Judea, thy servant Yedaniah, and his companions, the priests, and the fortress of Yeb / Elephantine. Now thy servants speak in the month, the 14th year of Darius, when Arsemes, or Armis, as he's also called, departed and went to the king. They entered a conspiracy. The temple of Yahoo here at Elephantine shall be removed. So in Isaiah, when it says that they shall build a temple, that temple in Egypt that Isaiah 19 is talking about was a temple in Elephantine Island. All right. Now, in the other part, it goes on to say, now thy servants Yedaniah and his companions and the Jews, all the citizens of Yeb or Elephantines, speak thus. If it seem good to our Lord, mayest thou think of this temple to rebuild it, since we are not permitted to build it, and look upon the recipients for their benefit, and of thy mercy here in Egypt. This is sadly what happens when you type fast. My fault. Typo, mistake, only human. Okay. A letter be sent from thee to them concerning the temple of Yahoo, that it be built again. So, brothers and sisters, what we're pointing out, if we will, in this particular matter, right, is this. The temple of Yahoo and Elephantine matter. That's where the Israelites were in southern Egypt. This is the area here. Not too far, if we will, brothers and sisters, from where Nubia, where Cush began. There was in ancient times between Mizraim, Egypt, and Cush, Ethiopia, no set aside place called the Sudan, because the Sudan, as we pointed out earlier, was partly controlled by Egyptians and partly controlled by the Ethiopians or the Nubians. All right, so we just want to point that out for reference purposes. Now, Egypt and Mesopotamia. Black history in the Old Testament. All right. Jacob, encouraged by this dream, went on more cheerfully for Egypt with his sons and all belonging to them. Now they were all in 70. I once indeed thought it best not to set down their names of this family, especially because of their difficult pronunciation by the Greeks. But upon the whole, I think it necessary to mention those names, that I may disprove such as believe that we came not originally from Mesopotamia, but are Egyptians. Now, this is from the book of Josephus. In the era of Josephus, right? He lived during the era of the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire, in part, spoke politically Greek. You understand? But what can we glean right here? That the Israelites were thought to have been from the Egyptians. And what he's saying is that, no, we're not out of as Israelites, the Egyptian people, we are from Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia is a Greek terminology, means the land between the two rivers. So this area here where the Israelites eventually winded up being, brothers and sisters, the peoples around them, like the Europeans or so, they thought, oh, the Israelites came out of the Egyptian people. But no, the Israelites did not come from the Egyptian people. But being that that was thought, what can we say of that? And I think some know where we're going. Brothers and sisters, wanted to show this. If this is the Egyptian people, certainly Neferhotep shown on the right, the Israelites look like that. Such as Hafra here of Dynasty 26. Brothers and sisters, the Israelites were black. And so these are things we just want to show and point out for edification purposes. All right? Goes on to say, Amen and Isaiah chapter 11, as we close out this presentation. And it shall come to pass in that day that the Most High shall set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of his people, which shall be left from Assyria and from Egypt and from Patros and from Cush and from Elam and from Shinar and from Hamath and from the islands of the sea. And he shall set up an ensign for the nations and shall assemble the outcast of Israel and gather together the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. So here we see Israel bold, Judah bold. All right, a symbol we're going to show here color coded, and here gathered together we're going to show color coded. A symbol gathered together. Then we want to show dispersed, color coded, green, and outcast, green. Brothers and sisters, that's Isaiah 11. The Bible speaks highly of the Israelites, speaks highly of the Ethiopians, speaks highly of the Egyptians, speaks highly of the Assyrians. All of those different nations, brothers and sisters, resembled each other. Some of them did business. They had different cultures, different laws, different understandings of creation stories, but they all had creation stories. Assyria, Babylon, Egypt, and Israelites had a story of a flood. It doesn't mean one borrowed the other. It means their particular ancestors passed on a tradition story, which was not making it a lie by saying tradition of there having had been a flood. You understand? Even ancient Egypt have a story of the world being a flood or a flood within the world. So these are things, brothers and sisters, we want to point out here. All right, from Assyria, Egypt, Patros, Cush, Elam, Shinar, and Hamath. Bold. Assyria, Egypt, Patros, Cush. So when we go here, we got Egypt, Patros, Cush, Nubia, Cush, Egypt. The prophet Isaiah is speaking about Israelites in those places. Assyria, Shinar, and Hamath. Assyria, we pointed out earlier, brothers and sisters, in the map, right? Okay, would be north over here of that particular case. I was thinking of the map from last night, pardon. But nonetheless, brothers and sisters, this is where Assyria is in this particular map. All right? So when we're talking about the prophecy in Isaiah, Assyria, Shinar, brothers and sisters, is over here. Is referred to as Sumer. Suma and Shinar are the same place. So the Bible in Isaiah 11 is talking about Israel and Judah scattered from this area here all the way to this area over here. The Israelites, in their own volition, as we've been pointing out, did not go to Europe. We want to point that out. Books to get on Amazon. All right, Egypt Talking Writing. That book is available on Amazon. All right, for $15. Deuteronomy 28, History Untold to the Masses. All right, that book too is available on Amazon for $15. From Assyria to America, the 12 tribes are in derision. That book too is available on Amazon for $15. And From Assyria to America, Part 2. Giving thanks unto the Most High. Brothers and sisters, this presentation being done, being presented, and what we want to, in respect, take advantage while our people are listening during this era of Black History Month. We want to, as the Israelites, present Black history from the stance of the scriptures and so forth. Last night, there was a presentation done. There will be, Creator willing, a presentation done tomorrow night. That is to say, Monday, February 8th, 8 p.m., 8:30 p.m. Subscribe to the channel, and when we go live, you'll get the notification. All right? So that presentation tomorrow, Creator willing, that one is intended to go over the Black presence in the Old Testament. One of the things to point out, as last night, brothers and sisters, the biblical characters are largely Negroes. That was said by J.E. Rogers in his book, 100 Amazing Facts About the Negro. Now, I want to take this time now, today's date being the 7th of February. All right? Brothers and sisters, giving thanks unto the Most High. A brother loves history. I like doing these kind of presentations. I like writing these books. When our people are listening, when I say our people, I'm talking about Black people. Be you from America, the Caribbean, South America, Africa, Europe, the islands of the sea, China, and so forth and so on. Be teachable. Admit when you make a mistake, like I made a typo earlier in the presentation. You understand? If we know and understand, brothers and sisters, as I've been hearing as an Israelite since I was a child, time is running out. Time is running out. We're in the end of days, if you will. I've been hearing that for years. What's going on now is a plague of the mind, a plague, brothers and sisters, where our people do not know where we are, where we came from, and thus where we should be going. This, brothers and sisters, is no disrespect intended to anyone. This, brothers and sisters, is not to say that the Israelites have all the answers regarding Black people. But what we are presenting, brothers and sisters, in this history stance is that we are saying that the bulk of our people go back to the ancient Israelites. When we hear the discussion or the comments of being indigenous to the Western Hemisphere, that does not hold accurate. The first people in the Western Hemisphere, definitely, yes, was of color, as pointed out by many, many scholars. You can't go to what they call the baby face of the Olmec, if you will, with the African-looking features, and deny that North America, Central America, South America had what you would call, in today's term, Black people. What we are saying is that going by prophecy, history, and showing the connection between the two, there are Hebrew writings in the Western Hemisphere. Rudolf Windsor, in his book From Babylon to Timbuktu, which is cited in these books here that are on Amazon, spoke about the Hebrew writings that they found in Algeria, which is in northern Africa, during the era of World War II. So, brothers and sisters, it is in due respect that these presentations are done, and due love and respect. I am open to constructive criticism. If, brothers and sisters, I stand to be corrected, please do so. If you click dislike on the video, I ask you to please explain what do you dislike. The description in the video will have my contact information. Giving honor and praise unto the Creator and Maker of heaven and earth. This presentation is now concluded. Please tune in tomorrow night, Monday, February 8th, 2021, 8:30, 8 p.m. or 8:30 p.m. We're going to shoot for one of those times. All right. But if you subscribe to the channel, you get the notification when we go live. Eastern Standard Time. That because I'm in New York. All right. So with that, Creator bless. Shalom.